Hi, this is Guy Wallace. I started in learning and development way back in 1979, and I semi-retired in 2023. But my current mission as a semi-retired L&D professional is to help enterprise learning and development organizations become more performance-based. Welcome to my podcast. This episode is about the testing of the instructional products before their release and use by learners. I call the three types of tests alpha testing, beta testing, and pilot testing. Other types of testing include testing for knowledge and skills and the performance capabilities or competence inside the learning experience and also back on the job. Those types of testing are covered in other podcasts. Please remember, this is how I approached my work as an external consultant for over 40 years. That was my context, and yours is likely different. So please feel free to adopt what you can and adapt the rest, and even reject whatever is inappropriate for you in your context. Let's go. I extracted pilot testing from where it typically appeared in development models and frameworks, like ADDIE, or the hundreds of other ADDIE derivatives that I had seen after only 3 years in the profession. And pilot testing, by that or some other naming convention, appeared most of the time in the development phase. And I framed it as a distinct phase, Phase 5, pilot testing, after Phase 4, development. I did that to make a big deal about it with my consulting clients and the project steering team members, as that was a key milestone, and that's when things got real, so to speak. To put the testing of instructional content in context, my first phase in my instructional development framework, which was really for project planning and management purposes because it is certainly not a design model, is Phase 1 is project planning and kickoff. Phase 2, analysis. Phase 3, design. Phase 4, development. Phase 5, pilot testing. Phase 6, revision and release. Back in the development phase, Phase 4, development before Phase 5 pilot testing, I was also doing the alpha testing and beta testing of the instructional content per the analysis-informed design. Our designs were at 3 levels or layers. Think blueprints for buildings or a house. The 3 levels or layers were 1. Event maps and specifications. 2. Lesson maps and specifications. And 3. Instructional activity specs. Instructional activities were of 3 types: infos, demos, and appos, or information, demonstrations, and application exercises, practice with feedback. I discussed all of those in an earlier podcast, number 49, back in late November of 2024. After creating the first drafts of the instruction, either performance guides and or learning experiences, the first drafts or the alpha versions, the project plan called for a round of alpha testing. Then updates would be made to create beta versions, and then additional rounds of beta testing would occur, followed by updates to create the pilot test versions. Version 3 is what we would take to pilot. So there would be 3 versions created before the pilot test, except for those lessons of instructional activities that were deemed in advance to be problematic. These were the lessons that I called the lessons from Hades. And I did that in front of clients and the development team, which was composed of the developers and the master performers and other subject matter experts assigned to the project. Those lessons from Hades would be planned proactively to have 5 versions instead of 3 to get ready for the pilot test, which was always intended to be a full destructive pilot test. So, testing. On a schedule that was created and shared in the development phase kickoff meeting where the assembled team members would be given their assignments. These development teams were the developers and their sources. the master performers and or other subject matter experts who were handpicked by the project steering team. First, we do alpha versions in testing. The development teams would meet to create the first drafts of their instructional outputs, again, performance guides and or learning experience content. That might include information, demonstrations, or application exercises, the infos, demos, or appos, but not always. Not every lesson included all three. Generally, assignments were for whole lessons, and the developer would have more than one lesson assigned to them, and they'd likely be working with different master performers and subject matter experts. But as always, it depends. Then the developer or developers would conduct reviews, first with the people who had given them the content in the first place, just to make sure that they captured it correctly, and then on to additional designated reviewers. In the second round, beta versions in testing, the alpha testing updates would be made to create the beta versions. The developers would then again conduct reviews, first with the people who had given them the content and the feedback, just to make sure that they had captured and corrected it appropriately, and then on to even more additional designated reviewers. Third, we do pilot versions in testing. After the beta testing, updates would be made to create the pilot test versions, unless of course the lesson was one of those designated as a lesson from Hades, in which case it would get 2 additional rounds of redevelopment and updates and reviews. The pilot test for me is always a full destructive test. We intend to break it if it can be broken, and I would respond to clients and stakeholders who were concerned about labeling it a full destructive pilot test. It was also a message, none too subtle, to the development team, the developers and their sources, those master performers and other subject matter experts handpicked by the project steering team. Their outputs, the instructional materials, would be thoroughly tested. I recall one project steering team member back in the early 1990s telling the rest of the project steering team and me that they hated pilot testing because that just gave the training folks an excuse for producing poor content. I responded that I was expecting less than 10% updates post-pilot, and that we could call the first delivery something else if he liked. He declined to change the name and seemed temporarily satisfied. But I knew that he was a true skeptic and that he could be very valuable, as he would likely send the toughest critics into the breach, into the pilot test session, for the full destructive pilot test. In the pilot test, I would always want to balance interrupting the flow of the session of the instruction, if it were group-paced versus coached or self-paced, with stopping to get timely feedback before it was forgotten. The pilot test is the first test of the full product, the minimally viable product or not. I would do lesson evaluations every few lessons, and I would do end-of-the-day debriefings and ask everyone to bring any additional questions, comments, or concerns to the next morning's preview and kickoff. And there'd also be a final written evaluation and a final verbal debriefing after that. The feedback would all be scrutinized after the pilot test, and we'd create revision recommendations for review with the project steering team in a formal gate review meeting at the end of Phase 5. Once they decided what we should really do revision-wise, those would be converted into revision specifications and handed off to the appropriate development teams to tackle in the final phase of our effort, the revision and release phase. I hope that this has been helpful. Remember, this was how I approached doing my projects as an external consultant. Don't be afraid to adopt what you can and adapt the rest. And please reject whatever is inappropriate for you in your context. Thank you.